Hi folks, thanks for spending a little time with me again today. We're looking at the beginning exercise in Arban, the Arban book, and in my edition this is on page 37, and it's called Studies on Slurring or Legato Playing. Now, of course, this is a huge subject for trumpet, but we'll just take a minute today, a minute or two, and see what we can find in the first exercise. Now, this is pretty simple. But I noticed that a lot of people they get a lot of information visually, and that's not a bad thing. So they're getting like, there's a decrescendo, then there's a crescendo, then there's a staccato note. So let's deal with that. I think what most composers are doing by putting symbols in the notation is they're trying to give the performer an idea of what they had in mind. Or in this case, since it's a book composed largely of drills to build skills for trumpet playing, they're trying to get an idea of what should naturally happen. But we tend to overinterpret these things. So we try to decrescendo, we try to crescendo. I think this is just meant to be totally natural. So I'm going to play a little bit of this. I don't know if I'll get all the way through or not, but you'll get the idea. Now, as always, if you've been watching some of these videos, you know that I always recommend, where's the music? So let's do a little analysis here. What I'm going to do is play in a slur, in continuous flow of tone, the first and last note of each of the bars. And it's always interesting to explore like this and see what we can find. Now, to me, when I hear that melodic line, it's so much easier to keep the breath going. It's so much easier because I know where I'm leading to. And otherwise, again, especially at slower tempos, it tends to become dee-da-dee-da, dee-da-dee. So I think Arban put the crescendos, decrescendos and crescendos in there to indicate that sense of direction. And I'm playing from the third quarter into the fourth quarter. Da, dum, da, dum. Now that brings me to another point. That's just the line. What many people will do, especially at faster tempi, will be playing the third note of the slur group short. And that's not wrong, it's an interpretation. Of course, it's not indicated in the notation here. You'd have a dot over that note with the slur marking and then a dot on the last note. And that's not what's going on here. But this is a very common thing to hear. And think of it, again, as a stylistic interpretation. It's not right or wrong. It's not indicated in the notation. It's something you can do. I just want you to be aware of what you're doing and be able to do it on purpose or not do it on purpose. So you have a choice. You have some freedom. So I'll play it a little bit quicker and you'll get the idea. So what I'm trying to allow you to hear is the release on that third note of each bar, the end of the slurred groove. So I'm releasing it. Now, here we get into some interesting details. You can release it or not. You can go. So now I'm playing directly into the staccato note. So the space, the separation, is at the end of the staccato note before the next bar starts. Now, okay, that's very analytical, but these are the things I want you to listen for, because these are the things that make the music sound interesting. They're the things, when they're consistent, that make the music sound clean and well crafted. They're the things that make it possible to play together and sound, have the group sound really, really connected, really synchronized, to have all the same musical ideas. So the first time I did a lift, and all I did was stop the air. Now this is something you already know how to do, because you know how to talk. You see, I just stop the air. Every time there's a silence, I simply stop the air. Now I want you to watch yourself when you're speaking, when you're singing, when you're whistling, whenever you're producing sound with the wind, and notice that you're doing this totally naturally and very, very easily. All you're doing is instantaneously stopping the air. And that's with the blower, you might say, with the breathing mechanism. That's what I mean by a lift. You're just releasing it. You're not ending it intentionally, you're just letting it go. Now, there's something very important to notice about this. There are a lot of ways to release it. I just released it just as if I would when I was talking, as I just said, da. But many people, when they're playing, will be releasing it either with the tongue, or stopping the note either with the tongue or stopping the note with the throat. So they'll be going da, 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 da. And even if they don't close it all the way, there's a tendency to go da, 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 and to get tension in the throat. Whereas when we talk, you see, we don't do that. Everything remains wide open. So playing open, no closing, no manipulation in between, in the silences, that's a really important thing to cultivate on the trumpet. And for whatever reason, most players have trouble with that. It's difficult probably because there's more air pressure in our body, and it feels like there's something that we want to react to. More air pressure than when we're talking or singing. So in spite of the fact that that may be the case, especially if we're playing in the upper register, we need to discipline ourselves to make it as much like conversation as we can. So you can practice this in the different styles, and please, as you do, notice whether you're doing any of that kind of stopping of the air with the throat or stopping of the air with the tongue. Now, I showed you doing it with the throat. Even easier is and that's a perfectly legitimate, useful way to play. The problem that most people have is, and you probably, if you have a trumpet instructor, or have had in the past, as I have, and most of us have, a trumpet teacher, that teacher may have said to you, don't stop the air with the tongue. The reason why I think many teachers say that to their students is because most people stop the air with the tongue, they kind of slam the air into the tongue. In other words, they're overblowing, they're pushing the air too hard, they're trying to drive too much volume of air through. And so when the tongue touches, it's smack, it almost gets stuck. It's kind of like a baseball going, pop into a well-worn glove. It's like pop. So you go, now that can be very useful. But many times we don't want that sound because it's a little rough. That's a little bit like the stop tonguing I talked about for big band in one of the other episodes. So we want it to be lighter. And actually that's very easy to do. If you don't overblow, and you don't close your throat, and you don't tense up, you just do it ta, 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 ta conversationally, you're not going to have a problem with that rough sound of the stop tone. So, to sum up, you're going to practice it 3 ways. Play directly into the staccato note, so the space now is after the staccato note. Okay, I hope you can hear that, and I hope it's kind of fun for you to listen to that stuff. Then you would do a lift. In other words, you're not stopping it with the tongue in the throat, you're just stopping it as you would in conversation. Okay, and the third one is you're going to stop it with the tongue. Now, you want to realize you can play that third note of the slur group when you're going to release after it. If you're going to release after it, you can play it at whatever length you want, and you can make it any shape you want. And that's where you get into the fun, kind of tasty details that make for the style. So a really good thing to do is listen to great players, not primarily on the trumpet. If you hear a trumpet player who's doing these things, they're a really good player. And if you hear, and they're a good musician, that would be a better way to say it. They're a good musician and they're letting their music come out through the trumpet. But it's better to listen to singers. Now that's different from trumpet, but there are some similarities. And I always recommend to listen to string players, especially violinists, since they have so much great music written for them as soloists, so it's easier to hear what's going on. And also, even though it seems strange, to listen to pianists, because the only expressive things that they have is the touch. They can't sustain sound except by using the pedal. So they have to communicate a tremendous amount through the textures of the articulation. And the mechanism is very limiting on the piano. But when you hear a great pianist, you're going to hear these textures and colors. And that's to me, that's very, very inspiring. So I'll go ahead and stop it with the tongue. So experiment with this. An easy way to do it is sustain a note, then tongue, legato, then tongue with some separation between the notes, and then gradually move toward tonguing with very staccato notes. So you'd be going. And the mechanism doesn't change. It's simple. The mechanism doesn't change. All that happens is the tongue stays touching gently, which is restraining the flow of the air for a longer period of time when the notes are separated, and for a very quick period of time, very briefly, when the notes are more legato. But there's always has to be, for good articulation, there always has to be a seal. And I think this is one of the things that Arban writes very much against. He hates that sound of the the. So instead of ta 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 ta, you're getting the. There isn't really any articulation. It's kind of mumbling, and for some reason he really doesn't like that. At least that's what he says in his writing. Okay, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how to practice even the simplest exercises when you're mixing slurs and tonguing, and then we start moving into the next group, which is you're playing. Eventually you're playing lip slurs, and you're playing simple slurs, and then wider and wider intervals, and then faster and faster changes between the range. And so that means it requires higher levels of skills. So you're going to want to practice out of this slurring section a great deal. And a general rule, what I do is when I have something that is to work on articulation, I play it sustained and as smooth as possible, and go through that routine that I just showed you with the with very, very smooth and very legato, and then gradually moving toward much more separated and articulated, and putting more front on the notes or concentrating on the back end of the notes. Now, most people aren't aware of these things, and And many people who are just naturally musical are doing these things automatically without even knowing what they're doing. They just hear it and they go, oh, that sounds cool. And then they try and do it and they listen to what's coming out of the horn and move in that direction. And actually, that's the best way to practice. So don't overthink this. I know I'm giving you a lot of details, but do listen for it. Listen for it in great players and listen for it in your own sound, what's coming out of the bell of your horn. And when you listen to recordings of yourself playing, listen for that, especially recordings like this where there are no other instruments covering up your beautiful trumpet sound. Okay, I'll let you go practice now, and I hope to see you later on. Have a great day. Bye-bye.